Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I'm sharing my project for the new challenge at the mailroom, the theme of which is toys. And I thought I would make a card that I had had in mind for a while and decided to do a video for it because I had originally planned to do this during my month of celebration and just didn't get around to it. This card is actually for my twin nephews who turned 2, and I'm being a terrible aunt by sending this over a week late, but at least I sent it in the end. I'm also a terrible aunt by only sending one between the two of them, but hopefully they won't mind too much because this took me so long to get the hang of. I just did not have the energy to make a second one, so I will have to make sure I do send them individual cards for Christmas. Anyway, I wanted to have a removable camera toy element on the front of my card. So I'm going to start off by making the camera, which is the easy part. And first of all, I found a piece of white card to use for my decorative part of the camera and stamped the dinosaurs from Pink & Main's Dinomite onto it. I wanted to do 3 dinosaurs, but they wouldn't really fit properly, so I just did 2, which is fine because the twins are 2, so they can, if they want, consider themselves to be a dinosaur each. I also stamped the images onto some scrap paper, just some printer paper, and I'm going to fussy cut those out and use my Tombow Monomoto liquid glue to turn these into masks. A side note here about the paper I'm using for my decorative panel. This is not alcohol marker friendly paper. I don't know what this paper is. It's just some random white paper. It's too thin. It's not sturdy. It's not good for alcohol markers, and it did cause me trouble later, which we will get to when we get there. But first I'm going to show you how I ink blended the background. I'm using the cloud and grass stencil that came in a Create an Inkspire kit, I think the July kit. And I will have a link to that and all the other products available in the description box below. I felt like these clouds worked really nicely for a child card, which is why I chose these over my MFT cloud stencil. Plus this has the grass elements, which I thought would work nicely. I realised I maybe stenciled the grass the wrong way initially, so then I was trying to work out how to fix that, and I thought I would try stamping the ink on with the stencil, which kind of worked, and I really liked the texture it gave, but it also didn't really work in the blades of grass area, which is where I most needed it. So I did use a very narrow brush to add the ink in there. The inks I'm using here are Altenew inks. I had Caribbean Sky for the sky and Forest Glades for the grass. And once I'd finished my ink blending, I did peel up my masks using my reverse tweezers to get them off. I do like to keep my mask, although the delicate arms of the T-Rex did break off when I removed it, which is fine. That's better than ripping the panel that I'm working on. I then started on my colouring, and this is where my choice of card really bit me. So I'm using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers, and as usual you can see the caps on screen. These are not the newer versions that I talked about recently because they have not yet arrived, but I do have a post notification that they should be arriving today, which is quite exciting. But anyway, I worked on my colouring, and because this card is so thin, the colour was becoming really saturated really quickly and made it extremely difficult to work with. I had some bleeding in some places because of the saturation, and I also had a hard time getting the colour to blend. So I had to work it quite a lot, which of course made it bleed more. It's not too terrible. I mean, there's a bleed around the T-Rex's head, which is particularly noticeable. And also I think it was on the other dinosaur's cheek. I'm not sure what this dinosaur is. If you know, let me know in the comments. I did use my blender pen to try and lift up most of the bleed, but it really didn't fix it that much. I would definitely suggest using the right card for what you want to do when creating your projects, because it really does make life easier. But I persisted and we got there in the end. I finished off the dinosaurs by putting back in the shines on their eyes with a white gel pen. And then to make this a bit sturdier for being the front of my camera, I'm going to put double-sided tape all on the back of that decorative panel and adhere it to a piece of chipboard. As I said, I want this camera to be a removable element from the card and I want it to be usable as a toy. And this is going to my 2-year-old nephews, so it needs to withstand some beating. I don't honestly expect this to last very long, but if it can last at least a day, that would be good. And I figured using chipboard rather than normal cardstock would really help it last a bit longer. So I ran that through the die cutting machine with the camera die, which is the Magic Iris add-on from Fawn. And this can't quite cut all the way through the chipboard, so I did go in with my craft knife just to go around the cut lines and finish separating that. And I am quite pleased with how this camera looks, despite the difficulty with the colouring and so on. Once I'd finished cutting that apart, I set it aside and I will start working on assembling the iris, and I'm going to go through this super quickly. I've shown this a couple of times before. You do need glue dots to add onto the sausages, and you can see the glue dots that I made myself, and I have a video up in the top right hand corner if you'd like to see how I did those. But I also did receive several sets of glue dots as a gift from Joan. She sent me some items with a birthday card recently, which was very kind of her. So I figured I'd use the real glue dots on this particular occasion, just because, as I said, I want this to be extra sturdy to withstand the boys playing with it. So I used those glue dots, and then I'm just continuing assembling the card. I did put a piece of vellum between the bits of the handle to make the arrow stand out a bit more. And then I will of course test the iris once it's all in place. I did have to make a slight adjustment to one of the stabilizers to make sure the iris could close all the way. And then I'm going to adhere that onto the back of the camera. I should have tested this on a card base first, because it ends up that I actually have that handle sticking up a bit too high, but I don't notice until right at the end, by which point it's far too late to fix it, so it will just have to do. Next I'm going to stick some acetate on the back of my iris, and I was using a snippet, but then the ends of the sausage piece, the little tabs, were catching on it. So instead I cut down a new piece of acetate to be the same size as the iris. I used the die as a guide and adhered that on the back. My original plan was I was going to turn this into a shaker card, but I decided that would be overcomplicated. I felt like I had enough going on with this already, so I figured that's just the viewfinder for when the boys are playing with it. They can pull the handle and look through the opening and pretend to take pictures. I hope they will do that. I hope they will enjoy it and not just be confused, but we shall see. I have to wait and hear what my brother says once they've received this. Moving on, I cut up some of the leftover pieces of the chipboard to adhere around the edges of the camera. This is just to pop up the next layer so I can add the back on and it will be above the iris. I can't add anything to what is currently, as we're looking at it, the left hand side, because I need the handle to be able to move back and forth. But everywhere else around the iris I can add these little pieces, and I'm doing 2 layers of chipboard. That seemed the right amount, and I'm using glossy accents. I then cut another piece of chipboard to be the sturdy back of the camera, and I also cut the magic iris into this because I was thinking I needed to do that to be able to cut away and fit the iris around this so the handle would still work. And then I realized I don't need to do this because this is the very back of the camera. It's going to be behind the handle, it's not on the level of the handle. So yeah, I didn't need to die cut that into it, and I didn't need to start cutting it apart with my craft knife either. So I did just put some washi tape on that to hold it together rather than having to cut it all again, and thankfully it worked. But yeah, I really don't know what I was thinking there. I didn't need to do that at all. I didn't want the back to just be plain chipboard. I thought that would be ugly. So I cut another camera from the same blue card I'd used for the iris. I'm going to adhere that with double-sided tape on the back of the chipboard camera, making sure I have it nice and lined up. And I then adhered it onto the back of the camera. I used a mixture of double-sided tape and glossy accents, again because I want this to be nice and sturdy and to be able to withstand the boys playing with it for as long as possible. I then also did go and find the little circle for the back, which someone on my previous camera video said is probably a sensor, so we'll go with that. So I inserted the little sensor into the back, and then I also die cut the flash from some pearlized silver card and adhered that into place on the front. Moving on to the card base, I kept this really simple, just with a brown card base and white heat embossed a sentiment from the cat's pajamas that says happy birthday. And I did make sure to position this to be behind the window of the camera when the camera's in place. I did have an issue with the card base warping because this card is quite thin, thinner than I would normally use, but because the camera is so heavy I didn't want a really heavy card base, so I did have to put some weights on that to flatten it a bit. I then spent way too long working out how to adhere the camera to the card base because I want it to be removable, of course, as previously mentioned. I eventually decided that magnet tape would be the way to go. This is the same magnet tape I use for storing my dies, as previously shown in another video. But I didn't want the magnet tape stuck permanently to the back of the camera because I thought that might get in the way when playing with the camera. So eventually what I decided to do was put some washi between the magnet and the camera, which kind of worked, but also wasn't consistently working strongly enough to hold it in place. So I put more washi tape over the top to really firmly hold those pieces on. And I have sent my brother a message already to let him know that he can remove these magnets before the boys play with it. And as I said, this was one of multiple attempts to try and work it out. I tried to use small magnets embedded in the camera, but the magnets I had were actually way too thick, so it just ended up really bulky, and I was also worried the magnets were so small they might be tempting for little toddlers to swallow. I tried paper clips on the back of the camera, which kind of worked, but they weren't strong enough to keep magnetized. So in the end, the magnet tape did seem to be the right choice. And here you can see how it looks when the camera is in place, and it does hold in place. I'm not sure if it will withstand traveling from Finland to England without slipping off, but I did my best. I tried, and I think it's a fun element. I hope the boys will have fun playing with it, and I hope you enjoyed seeing the process as well. I definitely learned a lot from the process of making this, and hopefully that will have been useful to you. Don't forget, this is for the new challenge at the mailroom, and if it has inspired you to come and play along, you can find the link to that in the description box below. Also in the description box are links to my accompanying blog post, social media, and shopping links for all the products I have used. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing with your friends, shopping with my affiliate links, and supporting me on Patreon if you do. Your support really means a lot to me. There are a couple of other videos showing on screen if you'd like to see more from me straight away. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!